Good evening and welcome. My name is Rabbi Scott Kalmaka. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the Riverdale Y. Thank you for joining us for Riverdale's community-wide Yom HaShoah ceremony, sponsored by the Riverdale Jewish Community Partnership, also known as the RJCP. The RJCP is a collaboration of 18 Riverdale Jewish communal institutions across the denominational spectrum of Jewish life, including synagogues, day schools, seminaries, and community organizations. We are deeply grateful to our community partners, rabbis, and lay leaders for organizing this evening's memorial service, with a very special thank you to Rabbi Linda Schreiner-Kahn of Congregation Tehillah. Tonight we gather as a diverse yet unified Jewish community to remember and honor the 6 million Jewish lives that were lost during the Holocaust. I invite Rabbi Schreiner-Kahn to lead us in the ceremony.
You're on, Rabbi.
I know, I am definitely on. Welcome, everybody. I want to take a moment just to realize that there are 141 people on this call. And even if your picture isn't on, take a moment and allow that to happen so that we can all scroll that for a moment and see all of your faces. I think it's important to realize that this is a moment of incredible community. So however you can scroll, just take it in. Take it in. There are just all these faces, all these souls coming together on this night from across our Jewish community. It's truly quite extraordinary. And what we're going to attempt to do coming out of Pesach, as we are, and which was a night of storytelling. Tonight is a night of storytelling. It's a night of remembering, as the generation who experienced the Shoah fades away and is no longer able to tell the story themselves. It is our task to tell the story. And there's so many different stories. And we won't get to all of them tonight, but maybe at the end, if you're willing to stay around in your breakout group, you can share yours. I begin this evening with a piece by Menachem Rosenschaft, The Second Generation. True, we are the children of an eternal twilight, the heirs of Auschwitz and Ponar, but ours is also the rainbow. To us, the storm meets sunlight to create new colors. As we add defiant sparks to an eternal fire. You all here tonight, you are the eternal sparks. And with that, I invite my colleague and friend, Rabbi Dina Nyman, to tell a family story.
Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you, Rabbi Linda, for all you do to allow us to have this moment of Yom HaShoah Ugvura, the strength that comes out of such pain and tragedy. But I was asked to actually speak about what took place before the darkness. Was there light? There was community, there was learning, there was vibrancy. And I was asked to share a story of, and I speak on behalf of my husband, James Licht, and my sister-in-law, Lisa Licht-Hirsch, who were inspired, and all of us were, by their grandmother, Lati Meyerhoff Licht. I'm going to just share a picture of her. Lati Meyerhoff Licht, who was born in Düsseldorf, Germany in 1905. Lati Licht had many positive memories about her life in Germany before Kristallnacht, before the night of the broken glass, before she lost her brother Kurt, before she lost family members, before the family had to leave. She describes a wonderful energy, complete with education and a place to grow intellectually and thrive in Düsseldorf. She was a proud German, going all the way back to her grandfather, whom she visited often. He was awarded the Order of the Black Eagle for his services to the city of Essen. His 4 sons fought for Germany in the First World War, but only one came home. Lati, or Chana, was proud that her family was distantly related to the German poet Heinrich Heine, and was able to recite his poetry by heart, as well as the writings of Goethe and other poets. She studied at the universities of Cologne, Berlin, Lausanne, and Frankfurt, and completed her doctorate in economics with Professor Franz Oppenheimer. She was offered a position as an assistant professor at the University of Frankfurt, which she did not accept because she was advised not to take it due to political considerations. She returned to Dusseldorf and worked at a welfare organization, placing Jewish orphans on kibbutzim and other locations in Israel. This was early on when the Nazis were encouraging Jews to leave the country. Her husband, whom she met in the US, was a successful physician in private practice in Breslau. While practicing in Breslau, he authored several medical research articles on blood disorders. Their life before the war was one, as I said, of vitality, of culture, and as positivity. To remember, when we remember the lives that were taken, a culture, a people, a place was taken away. A final note. When my husband and I got married, Lati Lech described why it meant a great deal that my husband was called Chaim Licht. That not only did she have the name of her husband, Licht, Chaim, but the light, Licht, and the Chaim, and the life that she once knew she was hopeful would be restored. Because as I said, she remembered the beauty of a place where she once lived.
The stories we tell are manifold, and tonight we are focusing on those stories of light. I share a brief one with you. My mother grew up in Berlin, a bourgeois young woman, and at some point my grandmother hired a tutor to teach her and her girlfriends about Judaism. And in walked a woman, and this woman announced to them that she was to be called Rabbina Jonas. So my mother's teacher was Regina Jonas, who later died in Auschwitz. But my mother went to her mother and said, "Das ist verrückt, that is crazy. How can a woman be a rabbi?" Well, I guess life proved her wrong. There are many of us around in various guises, but that was life then, and we remember it well. I invite Kathy Schreiner to say a few words about her family.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. And I'm honored to be here with all of you tonight as we remember those that are so near and dear to us. And as many of you, I am a first generation. My parents are both from Europe. I will talk about my mother. My mother was born in Germany. My father comes from Austria. My mother, Ruth Schreiner, was born in 1922 in a small town in the Black Forest, Alsace-Lorraine area called Schmieheim. And she was the only child of her parents. Life was not bad before Hitler came into Germany. But in 1935, when the Nuremberg laws came into effect, it changed everything. And she started being stoned going to school, and things got worse for her and the Jews in her area, in her town. And thinking that it would be better, her parents sent her to Frankfurt, but that didn't work out. It wasn't better, and she came home shortly after. And in 1936, my grandparents decided it was time for my mother to leave Germany. And she was sent to Switzerland to live with family, We had relatives. They lived in a small town called Winterthur outside of Zurich. And they were wonderful people who had a very successful business and no children. And my grandfather brought my mother to the border, and my mother and the family picked my mother up at the border, and that was it. And my grandfather went back to Germany, went back to their town, and shortly after, he was taken to Dachau, which at that time was a labor camp, and all the men in the area were taken as well. But then they were returned about 6 weeks later. But that was short-lived, and shortly after, the entire region was liquidated, and they were sent to the Pyrenees. The women went to the Camp Gurs, and the men were sent to La Mille. And my mother was living quite a nice life. She was going to school, finishing school in Switzerland with the family. And the family, her aunt was able to send packages to my grandparents in the two camps through Red Cross, and therefore keep in touch with what was going on. But you know, there was something else that was brewing, and I'm sure many people know about the fact that in 1938, as U.S. was not accepting any Jews into the country, the Avion Conference came into play. And as a result, the Dominican Republic decided they would take refugees. Obviously, all of this was about costs and money, and the joint distribution was very involved. And so the next saga of my mother's life, having met my father in Switzerland, who escaped from Austria into Switzerland and was in a refugee camp, they both learned about HaShoah. And separately, they did go to HaShoah, my father being the first group, my mother coming a few months later. They got married in HaShoah in the Dominican Republic, and they were able to save my maternal grandparents. So it is an interesting and story that has, there's much more to it, but I wanted to share this with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, in that time before Hitler rose, and even as the Nuremberg laws existed, the synagogues were beautiful. It was all before Kristallnacht. There was something amazing. And there was Lewandowski. And so I've asked Cantor Joshua Finkel to sing Tzadik Katamar.
Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Ke'erez Movanon Yizgeh Shetulim Bevet Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenuvun Beseva Neshenim Verananim Yehu Lehagid Ki Yashar Adonai Tzori V'lo havlata bo.
Thank you so much, Cantor. For many of us, that particular melody evokes very, very, very deep feelings. I had a long conversation with Nancy Stern Sholem and asking her to tell a story in the before times. She said, I have a story for you. I have a story for you. So I invite her to share that story with us right now.
Hi, that was so beautiful, Cantor. Thank you. As long as I can remember remembering, I have been obsessed with this picture. It was saved miraculously. Here is a picture, is my great-grandmother, Jenny Fish. She was the granddaughter of HaShoah Fish, who was the Gabbai to the first Kalavar Rebbe. She was the great-granddaughter of Yaakov Fish, the Rosh HaKol of the Nachkala community. My son is named HaShoah after my great-great-great-grandfather. And she's pictured here with my great-grandfather, Shlomo Yehuda Brown, and 3 of their first of 7 children. I was allowed to hold this picture when I had behaved very well, so I didn't get to hold it very often, but it was a most prized possession of my mother. And it was interesting because the whole family always referred to her as Jenny Fish, though her married name was Jenny Brown, but a strong group of women descendants have always talked about Jenny and her sisters as the Fish sisters. And so this is my Jenny Fish. Jenny and Shlomo Yehuda Brown lived in a town called Galsach, which was in Slovakia. It was Hungary, and in 1919 became part of Czechoslovakia. But when Jenny and Shlomo Yehuda Brown lived there, it was called Galsach, now Sechovce, and it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They had 7 children, my grandmother being one of those 7 children, born in 1884. And when Jenny was 35 years old in 1887, she became quite ill, and her niece, Marushka, who was her sister's daughter, who was an orphan, came to stay with Jenny to help her with the 7 children and to live with them and to have a home. Jenny died, and my great-grandfather was left not only with 7 children, but with Marushka in the household. The oldest son, Jakob Yoel Brown, who later became the editor of the Jüdische Presse in Bratislava in Pressburg, was sent away because he couldn't stay in the house alone unchaperoned with Marushka, his first cousin. And a few weeks after Jenny died, I found the marriage certificate of my great-grandfather marrying his wife's niece. And from that union came 5 more children. It always puzzled me how Marushka went from being his niece to his wife. But thanks to genealogical research, the first of the 5 children, I found their birth certificates, and no number 8 or number 1 was not born until 4 years later. So altogether, my grandmother was one of 12 children who basically were raised by their cousin, who was also their stepmother. One of the daughters from the second batch was my Aunt Bella, who was the only one of the 12 I had the honor to meet. And she told me she didn't know until she was 10 or 11 years old that there had been 2 mothers and that there was only one father, and the whole family dynamics just was never spoken of. One of my grandmother's brothers was a teacher, and he went to a town called Kosha, later called Koshitsa. And my grandmother went to Koshitsa to keep house for her brother. He had been in shul a few weeks earlier, and on Friday night, a gentleman invited him home because he saw he was alone, and with beautiful hachnosas orchim, invited him home. And my grandmother's brother told him that in a few weeks, his sister was coming from Budapest to stay with him. And so my grandmother was invited, as well as my uncle, to their home on a Shabbat. My grandfather, the son of the hospitable man, came into the room and took one look at my grandmother and knew instantly that he was going to marry her. And so that's how my grandparents met. My grandmother then went back to Budapest to ready her trousseau for her wedding on February 28th, 1910. This is a picture from their engagement, or maybe it was from their vort, and it took place in Košice. And you can see my grandparents there. My grandfather was much taller, and so I think to be able to fit into the picture, he's sort of like kneeling on one knee in the picture. The dress was my grandmother's pride and joy. And after they were engaged and she was heading back to Košice to begin her married life, Mariška, who was her stepmother, said she should leave the dress in Budapest because the next sister, Bella, needed to get married, and Bella needed to lure a husband with a very beautiful, elegant dress. And my grandmother didn't want to leave her dress behind and said it would be very embarrassing to go to Košice without her dress that everyone had seen. So the older brothers were brought into the family debate, and they decreed that the dress belonged to my grandmother. And so she was able to take the dress with her to Košice. My mother remembers this dress. It was beautifully wrapped up and put in a big hat box, which was in their break front in their home. And like me, when she was very good, which probably was much more often, she was allowed to take out this dress and use it for dress up. And she was a skinny little girl, but she remembered that how small the dress was and how tiny my grandmother had been. This dress always was in their bookcase wall unit. It was called a vitrine in Košice. It was in this vitrine 79 years ago this week when the Hungarian gendarmes came and took them from home to the brick factory in Košice as they were putting away their Pesach dishes. It might still have been in their home 6 weeks later on Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan when they arrived in Auschwitz. As a child of a survivor, this is how all stories end. A beautiful fairy tale, a love match, a dress, sisters, brothers, inter-family relationships. And if you keep telling the story, it ends in Auschwitz. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Really appreciate that. Again, to weave in the stories, my father grew up on the Austro-Hungarian border, and he survived the Shoah in Shanghai, where he lived for 10 years. But the stories he told were always about the before times. Stories he told were always about the general store that his parents ran in this small town, and how his mother, as he liked to say, was the Gehilfeversorger. She took care of people, and they would come into the store and ask for her advice while they bought rice or flour or whatever, and she would give it. And so the images of the life before, as Nancy said, are very rich and very beautiful. And for a child, they truly become a fairy tale. The rest of the story isn't so pretty, but at least we have that. With that, I invite Yvette Marin to tell us a little bit about her family as she gives us the partisan song in English at its conclusion. You're muted.
Okay. I was very moved by the story that you just told, Nancy. I wish I had had a closer hand to the people in Monastajiska, where my mother grew up, to be able to tell those kinds of stories. As a first-generation American, my mother would tell me stories, but when I look back over time, I had to get them in a different way. My mother was a poet. Her name was Malka Lee. She wrote in Yiddish. In Europe, she wrote in German. She left her family when she was very young. She was 17, the only one to come to America. The rest remained behind. And she did that because her mother gave away a ticket that was for her father to my mother so that she could go into a country where she could write freely and express herself as a woman. Hearing the story that Nancy told, I had to go to my bookcase here and take out my mother's autobiography, Durch kindersche Augen, Through the Eyes of Childhood. And I want to read to you just a very small passage from her introduction. I'll translate it as I go along. Von mir ist mein Städtele ewig. Ich will es aufheben von dem Asch und allein heuchen meine heiße Tränen in die Stücke Episoden, was mein Mama hat mir erzählt. Es soll nicht abgewischt werden in mein Sechorn, dass meine Kinder und Kindeskinder sollen wissen, their Obstan. And it says here, and I'll translate it, for Mir is forever eternal, my town. The town was Monastajiska, and that time it was on the Polish-Austrian border. Today it is in the Ukraine. Ich will es aufheben von dem Asch. I want to take it up from the fire, and I want my hot tears and all the episodes from this place, what my mother told me. It shouldn't get vanished, not ever in my memory. Dass meine Kinder und Kindeskinder sollen wissen their Abstamm. That is because my children and their children need to know where they came. So sometimes when I think about the town, I think about these two people. These were my Baba and my Zayde, my mother's parents, Chaim and Freda Leopold. And the story that most connected me to them in a very, very sad way was in 1941. I was barely 4 years old. It was a warm spring day, and I was coming home from nursery school. I walk into the house, and people are standing around, and my mother's lying on her bed with a shmata on her head. And I was just 4, and I was puzzled. What was going on here? And there was my brother. He was 17, much older than I. And I said to him, "What's the matter with Ma? Why is she crying?" And what he answered me changed the rest of my life. He said, "Hitler shot Baba and Zayde. They were shot on the streets of Monastajiska. It was just before they started using the death camps. And to this day, I think of my relatives who were partisans in the forests and fought back and came to America and raised their families. And today, I can't tell you how many people are reading this book. It's been translated because they want to know a town where my mother talked about weddings and what it was like to meet her husband and what it was like to grow a family. And this family was cut off. It wasn't just Zayde Bubbe, it was the 5 children. And I say their names because it's in memory of them. I have to say Haibele, Shmuel, Benjamin, Nutkele, Velvele, all shot on the streets. There are no Jews left in Monosajivka, but we have the memories. Never say you go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of the day, because the hour for which we hungered is so near. Beneath our feet, the earth shall thunder. We are here. We are. From the land of palm trees to the far-off land of snow, we shall be coming with our torment and our woe, and everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, our bravery and vigor will blossom forth. We'll have the morning sun to set our days aglow. Our evil yesterdays will vanish with the foe. But if time is long before the sun appears, let this song go like a signal through the years. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. It's not a song that summer birds sing overhead. It was a people amidst burning barricades that sang the song of ours with pistols and grenades. So never say you go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we hungered is so near. Beneath our feet shall thunder. We are here.
We are here. I invite Cantor Joshua Finkel to sing the partisan song.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Gott schimlen bleiene, verstehne bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schar. Sveta peugt von unser Trott. Excuse me. Wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schar. Sveta peugt von unser Trott, wir seinen da. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, so Spritz von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwurre, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, so Spritz von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwurre, unser Mut. So wird die Morgensen bald geben uns dem Heint. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Freund. Nur ob versamen wird die Sonne in den Kajor. Wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Nur ob in versamen wird die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lindel von a Feugel auf der Frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen faltige Event. Das Lied gesungen mit ne Gannes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen feindige Event. Das Lied gesungen mit ne Gannes in die Hand. Du sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst im letzten Weg. Gott schimlen bleiene, verstehne bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schar. Sveta peugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schar. Sveta peugt an unser Trott, mir seinen do.
Thank you. Thank you. We're at that point in our program. We don't have other storytellers, but we have another story. But I want to ask you, all of you, if there's a story that you've heard and that has touched you, not just tonight, but at other times, share it. Please share it. There's both darkness and light. We need both. They sustain us. And with that in mind, I invite Shira Silverman to read a story by Arthur Strimling.
There was a man. His name was John Hirsch. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was Hungarian. He was 11 years old in Hungary when his family realized that they would have to leave suddenly and soon. The boy was told to pack, but that he could take only a very few things. In fact, all he could take was one shoebox full. He said he spent every afternoon for months trying to decide, packing and unpacking all his treasures, his books, emptying his pockets. Now, this pondering of what to take has always fascinated me. I've moved a lot, so I've had to ponder. And I watch old people look around their houses trying to decide what to take with them to the nursing home, and how every object becomes a reservoir of memories. And that table should be left behind, but we ate half a century of meals on that table, holiday meals and everyday meals. Does it have to go? Or you clean out a closet and find an old blue dress, the one you first wore to meet a certain man, and its sleeves are thrown around its shoulders as if in an embrace. And that too has to go. Or you clean out a drawer, and you can't just throw away all those letters. These are not just objects, these are pieces of your life. So picture the Hebrew people looking around their houses the night before they left Egypt. And picture this 11-year-old boy looking around his room. What to take? Well, finally he got it down. But he didn't have just one shoebox. He had two. In one, he had his handkerchief, a pair of underpants, a sweater, a pocket knife, some hard candies. In the other, he had his grandfather's talit, his poems and drawings, his favorite hat, some postcards and photographs, a few pieces from his gem collection. All of his treasures. Each one of these things had a history. Which box to take? He said he never could decide. Then one day he came home from school and the whole block next door was gone, just smoking ruin. His family was waiting. Now, run. And he ran inside and he grabbed the box with the useful things. He was crying. He knew at that moment he had left his childhood behind. Well, they reached their hiding place and he opened the box. Mistakenly, he had taken the wrong box. He had taken the box with the photographs and poems and the hat and things. Such a shock. What to do with it? He said he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what to do with that box. He said it was as if he was drowning in the sea, and all he wanted to do was heave that shoebox back to the shore so someone could catch it. Anyone. Just so it still goes on, existing.
Thank you, Shira. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. We're casting our stories to the shore, asking you to tell them, and not tell them just once, but over and over and over again. There are stories too, not just the stories of the people who tell them tonight. They belong to each of us, and each of us has their own story. And before we have an opportunity to share some of those stories, I invite Cantor Finkel to chant the El Mali Rachamim, and if you are able, I invite you to stand.
רחמים, דיין אמנות ואבי תרומים. על נא תחשה ותתאפק לדם, ישראל שנשפך כמים. המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים. כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים, לשמותיהם של רבבות על פי ישראל, אנשים ונשים, ילדים וילדות, שנהרגו ונשחטו ונשרפו ונחנקו ונקברו חיים. בארצות אשר נגעה בהן יד הצורר הגרמני וגרוריו, כולם קדושים וטהורים, ובהם גאונים וצדיקים, ארזי הלבנון אדירי התורה. מגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you so much. I invite Rabbi Katie Greenberg to recite Psalm 23.
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God leads me in the paths of righteousness for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to invite all of you who are on to put in the chat the names of those that you lost in the Shoah. If you like, you don't have to. For me, there's so many names. I feel like I have to just put the family, right? And that's okay. However you want to do it, I invite you to do it. We're going to be breaking out into breakout rooms, giving you all an opportunity to share your stories if you wish. And if you don't have stories, to hear the stories of those who are in your group, because it's just as important to hear the stories, even if you're not your own. What I've come to learn is that the next generation and the generation after that, they become our story keepers. They keep the tales alive. Nancy's story of the dress is going to stay embedded in me. It's so visual. How can I help but keep it? Particularly with that wonderful photograph. So I also want to thank all of the people who participated this evening and putting this evening together. and by bringing some light to what came before, with the realization that the fairy tale didn't always end in light, but it ended in hope because we're here. Wir seien da. We're here to tell the story. And sometimes that's all that matters. So I invite Scott, Rabbi Scott, to give us our closing words as we get ready to go into breakout rooms.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Linda. For those of you who were not here at the beginning, my name is Rabbi Scott Kalmakoff. I am the Director of Community Engagement at the Riverdale Y. Thank you very much for joining us for Riverdale's community-wide Yom HaShoah ceremony, sponsored by the Riverdale Jewish Community Partnership, also known as the RJCP. The RJCP is a collaboration of 18 Riverdale Jewish communal institutions across the denominational spectrum of Jewish life, including synagogues, day schools, seminaries, and community organizations. We are again deeply grateful to our community partners, rabbis, and lay leaders for organizing this evening's memorial service, with a very special thank you to Rabbi Linda Schreiner-Kahn of Congregation Tehillah. Thank you again for participating this evening and coming together to remember and honor the 6 million Jewish lives that were lost during the Holocaust. We're now going to open the breakout rooms, and everybody's invited to share personal stories within your breakout rooms. There'll be about 5 to 6 people in each breakout room. And once your breakout room has come to the conclusion of sharing stories, you're invited to leave the Zoom call. Thank you again for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.